All righty. All right. I guess I should. Well, they're not here today, so maybe it will. Maybe it doesn't matter. Uh, mm. I'm just still debating in my mind whether I should talk about the Pope or not. Just briefly. I was going to do like 20 minutes on it. Well, let's take anyone interested, or do you want me to move on? If there's something you have questions about, well, I guess I should mention it. Yeah, I guess I should. I was going to. So I'll just do it for 20 minutes very quickly. But I might need someone to crack the whip on me because you know I talk a lot. So does anyone want to crack the whip? Anyone want to give me a little high sign like 20 minutes, Dr. Dunn, move on? Anybody? Nobody? Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Martin. You're setting your time?
Yeah.
Very good, sir. Excellent. All right, so I'll give you an extra credit point for that, sir. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yes, how does the papacy fit into all of this? There we go. Wearing his little Santa Claus hat, Pope Benedict XVI, who is now dead, may he rest in peace, but that's when he was alive, and probably when he, well, certainly when he was Pope. I guess I should change the picture to put Pope Francis up there, now that he's the current Pope. And actually, I do. Paul. I think I have it somewhere else in my notes, but maybe I don't. Okay. Anywho, the Pope or the papacy. So I've been talking, we see the structure of the church. There is very early on in Christianity. We see this even in the New Testament itself, but even in writings that were written during the time of the New Testament, like the Didache, and maybe even before some parts of the New Testament, already very clearly an authority structure amongst Christians, at which you have the highest level, a presbyter bishop or an elder overseer. And they kind of use the terms interchangeably in a lot of ways, but then the church comes to favor overseer as the common term, or bishop, and deacons or servants and stuff like that. But where does this dude fit into it? Because when people talk about the Pope, he's the Bishop of Rome, yes? He's a bishop amongst other bishops. The Pope is not unique in any sense as another part of the hierarchy. It's not like you have Pope, then bishops, then priests, then deacons, then the laity. No, the Pope is part of all the bishops. So the Archbishop of Philadelphia, is as much a bishop as the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, who we call the Pope. The Bishop of East Jabib. Whatever the smallest diocese in the world is. I should look that up to see what the smallest diocese in the world is. But, maybe the Northwest Territory, although the Northwest Territory in Canada is huge, but it's small in numbers. But the Bishop of the Northwest Territory is as much a bishop, which is in Canada, by the way, Mr. Root, just in case you're wondering. Which we might own soon, Mr. Wilmer. I don't know. I don't know what's going on these days. We're talking about invading like 3 different countries at once. I don't know. Nevertheless, the Bishop of the Northwest Territory in Canada is as much a bishop as the Bishop of Rome. Yet we call him the Pope, and he gets all this attention and focus. And he should. I'm not saying he shouldn't. But where does he fit into this structure as well? Well, first of all, he's part of the Pope is part of the structure. As I said, he's a bishop. Okay, he's an overseer. So he's not like somehow separate from the structure of the hierarchy of the church. And over the last 2,000 years of history, as far as we can tell from the list of popes that we have, the names, there have been about 264 popes of Rome. Benedict XVI, which is when I made this PowerPoint or revised it, it's 265. And so doing your math, Pope Francis is 266. Okay, more or less, because we have lists of the names of the popes, and sometimes the parts of the list are a little bit dodgy and a little bit fuzzy about who actually should be called Pope or whatever. But I think it's generally correct. And the Pope is simply a title. Okay, so it's not an office, really. It's a title given to the Bishop of Rome. Why is this title specifically given to him? Because he does have a unique position in the church as a successor of Peter the Apostle. Okay? So as we saw when we looked at the lists of the apostles, Peter is always mentioned first amongst the apostles, and that's by design. That's not an accident. It's not just that's how it shook down. Every layer of tradition we have has Peter, or I shouldn't say every layer of tradition, but Mark and Matthew and Luke both agree that Peter comes first. And Matthew spells it out. He says in Greek, the first Peter, okay, out of all of them. So Peter does have a kind of unique position amongst the apostles as a leader, okay, you could say a servant leader. But what's his connection to the Pope necessarily? All right, we'll get to that in a moment. First of all, the word papa comes from Greek papas, which simply means a father. We use the same term that we use the same word in English when we talk papa. You can call your dad pop or papa. And in the early church, the earliest days of Christianity, all bishops were called papas. And even we still call priests papas, fathers, or popes. But all bishops were called popes. They were called father figures. It's only in, I believe, I don't have this on I do have it on the PowerPoint. It's only in the 6th century, around the 500s, that this general term for all overseers gets restricted specifically to the Bishop of Rome, and he becomes the Papa, the Pope, all right, as it comes into English. But we still see this tradition in other Christian communities. For example, I was hoping Ms. Mansour and Ms. Abdul Malak would be here and they don't mind me saying this, but they're Coptic Orthodox Christians, Egypt, Christianity in Egypt. And the head of the Coptic or the Egyptian Orthodox Church is still called Pope. His name is Pope Tawadros II. Tawadros is his name. And he's called the Pope of the Coptic Church in all Africa. I think he has a longer title. But they're still preserving that tradition in the Coptic Church. And in the Roman Church, it just gets applied specifically to the Bishop of Rome. Okay, that's why the Patriarch of Alexandria is here, because that's the head of the Patriarch, or the Bishop of the city of Alexandria is the Pope of the Coptic Church. So, Tawadros is Bishop Alexandria, Pope of the Coptic Church in all Africa. And so that's where we get the word the papacy from. The papacy, the name for the office, the jurisdiction of the Bishop of Rome in general. All right? I'm not going to go into the scripture, but basically, because we already covered some of this when I talked about the apostles and Peter specifically, we know that Jesus changed Simon's name. His name was not Peter. In fact, Peter was a very unusual name, or really a nickname, not a name. We don't find anyone in the ancient world of Greece or Rome called Peter. Maybe someday some archaeologist would dig up something, but in all the records that we have, the inscriptions and manuscripts, nobody was called this. Not as a name, at least, and not even as a nickname. But Jesus takes this man, Shimon, Simon, and gives him the name Kepha in Aramaic that we saw, Kepha, which means a rock or a stone, which the gospel writers translate for us into Greek as Petros or Peter. Okay, but they mean the same thing, a rock or a stone. So Simon the Rock, just like Jesus is called Jesus the Anointed, he's called Simon the Rock. Okay? A rock of what? What is he the rock of? Well, it was the rock of Peter's faith. According to the Gospels, Peter, or this man Simon, was apparently the only one of the 12 who had the guts, I guess, to recognize or state his faith that Jesus was the Messiah. I guess we will read this text from Matthew, because it is an important text. Matthew 16, chapter 16. God bless you, Ms. Cohn. God bless you. You've stayed with me in my trials, Ms. Cohn. Yes. I'll read it just so I can move along because I know I'm on the clock, right, Mr. Martin? He's taking this seriously. Oh, anyways, all right, so I got to move. So Matthew chapter 16. And this is, remember, if you read the Gospel of Mark, you already know there's the scene in chapter 8 where Peter, Jesus asks the apostles, who do people say that I am? What do the crowds think I am? Jesus does a little poll. And they're like, well, some people think you're a prophet. Maybe you're John the Baptist come back from the dead, which I don't understand how the people could think that because Jesus and John were contemporaries. So I don't know. And when they were standing next to each other, I don't know how Jesus could be the reincarnation of John the Baptist, but some people thought that, so it's superstitious ideas. Okay, but Jesus then lays it down. He's like, so what do you guys think about me? You've been with me. What do you think of me? And there's like silence. No one apparently wants to voice an opinion, but Peter or Simon does. He says, you are the Messiah. You are the Christ. So he gets it. He's willing to make that act of faith in Jesus. So it's the rock of his faith, his belief in who Jesus is. Okay? And Jesus doesn't say he's wrong. He just says, don't tell anybody. At least not yet. Don't say anything. All right? So Matthew is copying this story from Mark. As we know, as I told you before, we talked about the Bible, and the author of the Gospel of Matthew uses Mark apparently, or at least the tradition that's found in Mark, as his basis. But he amplifies this story. He adds things to it because he has a high view of Peter, of Simon Peter. And so in Matthew 16, Jesus says, who do you say I am? Okay, what do you think? And it says, Simon Peter, this is verse 16. Simon Peter said in reply to Jesus, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Okay. Now, again, whether Peter said actually those words, I don't know because I wasn't there. In the Gospel of Mark, Peter just says, you're the Christ. So scholars think maybe Matthew was interpreting that for us. It's the Christ, the Son of the living God, which is also a messianic title, as I told you, right? A son, the kings of Israel were seen to be as adopted by God, so they were his children. But it also, the church has seen this as a further, and you see this in the Catechism, a further expression of Christ's divinity as well. Anyways. So you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Notice in verse 16, Matthew already calls him Simon Peter, right? Right, Mr. Scott? Jesus hasn't changed his name yet in the story. And yet he's already known as Simon Peter in Matthew's mind. It's embedded there. Simon Peter said in reply, what's this Simon Peter? Jesus said to Simon in reply, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my heavenly Father. So basically, you didn't get this through simple human logic or whatever. This is a revelation. This is given to him by God. He has this inspiration of, he gets it. He's open to receiving this faith. So it shows the specialness of him. And so what does Jesus do? So he changes his name. You are rock. You are Peter. And upon this rock, I will build my church, my community. This is one of the few times that Jesus uses the word church. Should have told you this before. Did Jesus actually use the word ecclesia or kahal or whatever in Aramaic? We don't know. Okay, this could be Matthew placing it in the mouth of Jesus. But certainly Jesus is indicating his community. The community of believers will be built on Peter, on you, I will build my church. He doesn't say on your act of faith or your belief in me. Certainly those are there because it's a person who's believing. But Jesus is making it personal. On you, Simon, I will build my community. Whatever that means. And even more so, the gates of the netherworld, of Hades. Sometimes it's translated hell, but that's, not the best translation. The underworld, where all the shades and the spirits are, shall not prevail against it. So even death itself will not prevail against my community, which means he's expecting it to continue. But Jesus goes even further in Matthew's account. I will give you, again, personal, not abstract like his act of faith. It's personal. I will give to you personally, Simon, now called Peter, the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loosen on earth shall be loosed in heaven. So that's interesting. That's rather interesting. Jesus is dumping a lot of authority. He's giving, it's like the keys to the city of the New Jerusalem, heaven. Okay? I will give you the keys of heaven, not just earth. Because whatever Peter, and remember, it's singular in the Greek. He's not talking to the other 11 apostles. He's saying, to you, Peter, what you bind on people, what you tell them to do, apparently, or your will, I guess, they're supposed to do. It will be bound in, as if it's bound in heaven. God will respect it. And what you loose for people, what you tell them they don't have to do, or they don't have to believe, that will be loosed in heaven. Which is another way of saying God. God will respect it. Of this man, Jesus is saying. Okay. So Simon is a big deal in the community. But then you have to tease out, what does that mean in practice? Does that mean that the Pope, the Simon, the first Pope, you could say, I mean, like, all of a sudden he's like Il Capo, in the mafia. It's like he gets to tell the other apostles what to do. No, he's part of a community of believers, and the Pope is as well. The Pope is not all by his lonesome, telling people what to believe and stuff, because the Pope has to believe. Peter believed. He had to believe that Jesus was the Christ. And actually, I'll move on from this. Actually, no, I'll stay here for a second. I'm not covering these things, so if I don't talk about them, don't worry about it. I won't test you on them, but I'll just test you on what I'm talking about. But how does Peter get to the Pope? Okay, because you could say, all right, I see that, Dr. Dunn, with Simon and Peter, but Pope is the Bishop of Rome, right? It's over in Italy. Peter's from Palestine. Well, okay. Peter, what happens is that Peter eventually travels to Rome, apparently, and he is killed there in the 60s for his faith. So he's martyred. Okay, and that meant something to the early Christian church. People who, as we'll see when we talk about, well, maybe we'll talk about this, but people who are willing to die and shed their blood for their faith. So the fact that Peter gave his final witness to Christ, gives his first witness, Matthew 16, where he says, "You are the Christ," and he gives his final profession of faith in Jesus in Rome in the 60s when he is killed for his faith in Jesus and buried there. And so the Church of Rome, that's his final resting place. Peter had been other places as well. He had been in Jerusalem. He had been in the city of Antioch. But no one knows the Bishop of Antioch is the Pope, or says that the Bishop of Antioch is the Pope or anything like the Pope. No, or the Bishop of Jerusalem. It's the Bishop of Rome, because that's where he ultimately ended up and gave his life, shed his blood for his belief in Jesus. So the authority, the power that Jesus gives to this man Simon was seen very quickly, at least in the Roman church. Other churches respected the fact that Peter had died in Rome, but his power and authority was seen to have been transferred to the bishops of Rome for apostolic succession. Okay, that the apostles, the power and authority of the apostles gets passed on to the overseers. Okay, and so there was a belief that there was a transferal of the promises that Jesus gave to Simon did not end with him, but were part of who he was. And so now that becomes, since the Bishop of Rome is seen as his successor, then those special prerogatives or powers become part of the Bishop of Rome. Okay? That no other bishop has. All right? So they're unique to the papacy. What is the uniqueness about the papacy? What's the papacy supposed to do? Well, what ultimately or what originally Peter did, which is proclaim faith in Jesus, remind the church of its faith. We'll move on from that. Proclaim faith in the risen Christ, just as any bishop or apostle. To teach the message of Jesus and to feed and tend the flock. This is from the Gospel of John, but I'm not going to read that for you. But in the Gospel of John, just very quickly, how am I doing, Mr. Martin?
20 seconds.
Oh, okay. All right. I might go just a little bit over, but okay. I'll just summarize the Gospel of John. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just there's this episode in the Gospel of John where Jesus has a conversation with Peter, and Jesus 3 times asks Peter, Simon, do you love me more than the other apostles? 3 times. Because remember, Peter had denied his faith in Jesus 3 times. Remember, he denied that he even knew Jesus. You know, when the going got rough, Peter's faith became a little bit shaky, not so rocky. Anyways, so there's this kind of rehabilitation scene where Jesus asks him 3 times, same question, do you love me more than the other apostles? And Peter says, yeah, each time, yes, of course you know I love you. And then finally, the 3rd time, Peter becomes distressed. He's like, Jesus, of course you know I love you, you know? He knows what's going on here. And each time Jesus responds by saying, feed my sheep, meaning my followers, feed my followers, tend my followers like a shepherd, which is interesting language because if you read the Gospel of John, it's the only God, that's where we get this idea of Jesus as the good shepherd from. Jesus does not use that image of himself in the other Gospels. It's only in the Gospel of John where Jesus has this discourse where he talks about himself as, I am the good shepherd. Okay, my sheep know me and I know my sheep and they hear the sound of my voice like a shepherd and they follow my voice. But now he's saying in John's Gospel, he's saying that you are now my voice. Tend my sheep like a shepherd. So that's where the papacy comes in. Okay. The last point I want to make, very last point, is that the papacy does not exist on its own. It is always about him. Well, not him, that's an image, just an image, but Jesus. And look who's carrying Jesus, the image of Jesus. Oh, look who's looking at Jesus, not looking at the Pope, looking at Jesus. Yes, I know when the Pope comes out of the balcony, like, people go crazy. You know. All right, you know. But the Pope should always be reminding people that it's not about him, it's about Jesus. And if you read the history of the church, can the popes forget this, Ms. Westergom? Some of them, no. Have you read the history of the church? Pornocracy? Yes, they can. They're human beings, and sometimes, just like Peter was the first pope, and yet, as I said, he denied Jesus 3 times. He made a mistake. So yeah, you can have, they're human beings, just as Peter was. Jesus knew that, I imagine. Jesus knew that, knew what he was dealing with. And so, yeah, and you've had 266 popes. Some were good, some were bad, some were mediocre. Okay, some were smart, some were dumb. You've got different personalities, people living in different historical periods, and some of them saw the papacy more as a servant, which I hope they would see it in that way. But other popes saw it very much in a political sense, just in the sense of power. You know, hey, it's good to be the Pope. I can do whatever I want, basically, which they can't. Because the Pope always has to proclaim the message of Jesus. He can't just change the message of Jesus, even if he might want to or try to. What's going on with the bell tower? Anything? Moving on, Dr. All right, God. And no, I'm not blaspheming. I'm just saying the word. We'll get to God eventually. God, 1 and 3. The Lord, the big cheese, the supreme being, the guy with the long hair and beard. Yes. Or he could be a girl. I don't know. I say guy, but I shouldn't assume, should I? Nevertheless, God. What is the Christian faith about God? Well, we have to remember and set our minds aright that we use human language. We use human language, and really language is expressing the concepts that are in my head or in your head. Your concepts are being formed in your head as you listen to the words coming out of my mouth. And, our language and our concepts are limited. Okay, that's just the nature of being creatures, bounded creatures, all right? There are boundaries to our physical bodies, and there are boundaries to our knowledge and the way we can express our knowledge. So they're limited and inadequate, and that's certainly the case when talking about something like God. But it's, with anything, even the physical universe. I mean, has anyone taken physics in high school or college? Mr. Root? Ms. Crystal? Really? Physics? Well, at a certain point, most of physics is symbolic language, right? It's some symbols written on the board because the principles or the ideas, the concepts are really inexpressible, So physicists have to resort to all sorts of Greek letters and also Latin letters, but all sorts of symbols and stuff like that to express what they want to say because it's limited. And there's some things they simply can't express. Like, how do you express infinity? So they have a symbol for it. And off she goes. Yeah. No, even mathematics. Talking about physics, but mathematics. I mean, there are some numbers that are just so huge you can't express them. 10 to the 20th power. You have to find some way to express them, because you can't do it literally, because you'd be writing some numbers, you'd be writing zeros for the rest of your life. So it's no different in theology. Okay? I just say that because I know some people, you go on the internet and you find, atheist websites and provocateurs, rationalists who will go after religion because what's purpose? It makes no sense to talk about God. It's purposeless because God's incomprehensible. And how can our words express God? Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But think about what I just said about the natural sciences. We have to figure out workarounds there. So we have to have workarounds in theology as well. But we can still talk about something. All right. There's still reliable tools, instruments, as long as you recognize that they are tools, pointers, instruments that we can rely on to know something, not just about God, but about the physical world as well. And things in our language might not always be spelled out or clear with absolute crystal clarity. God bless you, Mr. Root. Sometimes things are just right enough about God, just about anything else in the world. We know the physical universe in a right enough way right now, but in a few centuries when the technology develops, hopefully we'll get better technology. People will think of new ideas and new things and stuff like that. The conception will be probably different of the universe. Still the same universe, unless I don't think they're going to find that, there really isn't a sun out there. It's an illusion. No, still the same universe, but though people 500, 1,000 years from now will probably have better tools and better instruments and better ways. And their view will be right enough. Because we're never going to know the whole universe, especially just like with God. Because if you do believe the astronomers that the universe is infinitely expanding, where does it end then? If it's infinitely expanding. It comes from someplace, but it's infinitely expanding, yes? Meaning without end, so there's no limit to its limit. So you run into the same question that some people can have about talking about God. How can you talk about the universe then? Because you can never fully, it's just in principle not possible to have full knowledge about it ever, because it's infinitely getting bigger, producing more. So we can be right enough. We can know enough with the shabby language that we have. And sometimes I think, when I think about these things as a theologian and as a Christian, I think the aim of the Holy Spirit or God is just to make sure that we don't get it wrong. Sometimes it's a negative protection, not a positive. It's not so much that God wants or needs to tell us, this is what I am, but no, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. So we don't get it wrong is maybe more important sometimes to the Lord. So, what is a God? In general, when we talk about gods in English, you can see where the word comes from. It comes from, if we go all the way back to the ancient, when our first parents speaking our Indo-European languages, Proto-Indo-European, Protos first, Gutom, something that's invoked, called upon. All right, that sounds like what you do with a god. You call on a god for help or something. But a god is simply any powerful superhuman entity. Any powerful superhuman entity. Something that's more powerful than a human being, basically. Has more force, more energy, So if you ever, study religion, I know I got an itchy nose. I always get fuzzies on my nose, and I feel like I can't get them off. Anyways. If you study religious studies or the history of human religions and stuff, it's not surprising in the most ancient, what we think are the most primitive, although they're not stupid, they're just primitive, they're more ancient, they're primal first, they're the more ancient forms of religion. People worship and see things as gods that are very powerful natural entities, storms, mountains, because mountains are big and stuff like that, and they're imposing. The sea, because the sea is mysterious. You don't know what's beneath it, and it's huge, and it can flood you and kill you and stuff like that. So power, things that have energy and force, they're more powerful than human beings. Even animals, of course, like bears that are really strong, stuff like that. Just oxen. Animals that are stronger than human beings and harmful or scary, things you're scared of, like snakes or things. They have power, they have energy. So in a general sense, that's a god. You would invoke that thing, usually to not do you harm. Please, storm god, don't flood our area and kill us all. And or mountain god, don't erupt as a volcano or have earthquakes or things and topple rocks on us. So you would invoke these things, Please, snake, don't bite us and kill us. Don't harm us. But the term I'm using here for God, at least as I'm defining it, and as we find it, I guess, in Hebrew thought and Christian thought, is an ultimately perfect and a completely and ultimately perfect personal being. A being, a thing that exists as a person. It's not an abstraction, okay? It's a person, something that can be in relationship with other things that exist. And its nature is to be perfect. There's nothing to be added to this being. It has perfect existence. There's nothing to be added to its existence or taken away. It's not in need of anything, not in desire of anything. And this perfection is complete. It's complete perfection. Because as we know, when I talked at the beginning of the course about Jesus as the perfect revelation of God, I said, it can be perfect, can be all we need to know, but there might, of course, be more that we could know. All right? There is. There's more that we could know about Jesus, but God, the revelation in Jesus is perfect because it teaches us all that we need to know for salvation. So you can have perfect, but not complete. But God is perfect or complete perfection. Nothing is added or taken away. And it's ultimate. So there's nothing beyond the perfection of God. Like, something more perfect than God, who is perfect or completely perfect. That's beyond. That might sound like, what does that matter? Well, because some people could say, well, God has a nature, right? So he gets it from something else, doesn't he? He has a divine nature. His essence is divinity. And some people over the centuries have proposed that there might be this kind of existent, not as a personal God, but, God, divinity kind of exists in the abstract, and then it's given to God in a way. But no, God's as a ultimately perfect. His essence and his personhood are identical. He is exactly what he is. Okay? He's not made into God. Okay? Like I'm made human. Sperm and an egg came together with the DNA and the RNA and all the other NAs and the somes and the stuff, and me, I received a human nature from my parents. God doesn't receive his nature from anything else. He is ultimately perfect in his nature. They're identical. So this is the Judeo-Christian of God. In other languages, am I going to do that or I'm going to move on from that? Yeah, because I like languages. I'll skip to the Hebrew, actually. Uh-oh. I lost her. No, I'll skip over the Greek and Sanskrit. I'll go right to the Hebrew. Save myself some time. In Hebrew, the word for God is Ayil, is based on the word Ayil in Hebrew, which becomes El or Eloah in Hebrew. El, God, is the word for God. You can see maybe the relationship with like Arabic, Allah, which means God in Arabic, related languages. But ultimately, Ayil means, again, strong or mighty, so power or force. If you have strength or power, okay? So that's what it literally comes down to. I mean, if you wanted to literally translate El in the Bible every time you see it, you could call it the powerful one or the strong one, instead of God. And that's how you see God represented a lot in the very old, some of the oldest writings in the Jewish scriptures. They emphasize God as powerful. I mean, read the Psalms, the songs about God, poetry, and note how many times in the book of Psalms it makes a big deal about how powerful God is, his might, his strength. All right? That's embedded in the word in Hebrew, Ayil. Okay, so there is a God. That's the first thing I guess I could tell you about Christianity, Mr. Mr. Mexcatitla. You're usually over there, but now you're all the way over there in the corner. Am I losing you, sir? All right. Don't go any farther. You'll go into the closet and I'll be able to find you. Okay. There is a God. All right, that's a non-negotiable for Christianity, that there is a God. You would think that's a non-negotiable, but no, not necessarily. Yeah, in my neck of the woods, he's not bishop anymore, but the bishop of the diocese of Newark, Episcopalian, not Catholic, Episcopalian. John Shelby Spong. He's not bishop anymore. I don't even know if he's still alive, but came up with this idea of atheistic Christianity. Yeah. You can believe in the principles of Christianity, do good to your neighbor, don't turn the other cheek, but you don't really need God for that. You can be an atheist, And I even know this one guy, the scholar, Robert Price, who's a Jesus mythicist. He doesn't even believe Jesus Christ existed. He thinks he was made up. He's a character that was just made up by people later on for whatever reason, I don't know. And he's an Episcopalian, and I remember reading an article of him in a book recently. He was talking about going, I love to go and receive Holy Communion at my Episcopal church. And doesn't even believe Jesus existed. It's like Jesus was Spider-Man. He was a comic book character or something. Okay. So for some Christians, the fact that there is a God Ain't necessarily so. Thank God we have a pope, right? Because at least the pope can like bring down the hammer and say, no, you have to believe that there's a God if you're a Christian. And when we speak about God, we want to speak about two philosophical terms, essence and existence. And these terms apply to us as well. They really apply to anything, but they apply to God as well. An essence is what something is in order to be what it is. Okay? Or you could just say it's what something is. When you ask the question of what, Mr. Womer, yes, Mr. Womer, stay with me, Mr. Womer. You're asking the question of nature, okay? You could also say nature. Something's nature. It's being. It's substance. These are all different philosophical terms. They're all used in different ways. Don't ask me. I still puzzle over it myself, even though I was a philosophy major in college. But go to Dr. Messina. He would love to talk to you about it. If you want to know. One of these days I have to kind of like pin down what's the difference between all of these. But anyways, essence comes from the Latin word to be. So to be something, esse. Sum is I am. So what something is to be what it is. To be human, I have to have a human essence. Otherwise, I'm not human. I can't be human with a dog essence. Because then I'm not human, I'm doggy. I have a doggy essence. Canine. Existence, okay, to make something stand out of something, in a way, stand up, like almost like a magician, poof. Something comes into existence, it pops up in front of you, it stands up in front of you. Sisto, X. So to be or have being in reality. So to have, I guess I probably should, maybe I think I mean essence. So to have an essence in reality. So it's not conceptual. Okay? A unicorn in my mind, or a flying spaghetti monster in my mind, has an essence, but it's conceptual or notional, or other philosophical terms you use to indicate that it's really in your mind. It has no existence in reality. It has an existence in my mind, but has no existence in reality. So to have essence, to essay, in a manner of speaking, in reality, is existence. Plenty of things can have an essence. Bigfoot has an essence. But if he exists, Mr. Scott, right? That's the question. If he exists. So the question of his existence, the essence of Bigfoot, is not in question. People describe Bigfoot all the time. Oh yeah, big, really big, powerful, shaggy hair, looks kind of ape-like, but human as well. So we know the essence. But, except for a few grainy pictures and stuff, and fuzzy pictures, and videos, we don't know if there's an existence. There may be, Ms. Patton, there may be. So these questions of nature, essence, and existence. Okay, move on. All right. And I do want to thank someone, you don't know him, but Dr. Brandon Zimmerman. When I was in Papua New Guinea, he was the Dean of Studies and the philosopher. Now he's teaching down in Texas, the University of St. Thomas. He helped me, had shed some light on this for me. Because it can get confusing. If it confuses me, I have to sympathize if it can confuse you or things might not be completely clear. Okay? We can distinguish then, when we talk about these things, we can distinguish between being in and of itself, okay, whatever is existent, ends. So something exists. And it's a what? What is it? If it exists, or if we are giving existence to it in some way, Just like I said about the unicorn or the flying spaghetti monster, or Bigfoot or whatever. Okay, it has essentia, what something is, essence, and then esse, to be. It has existence. That it is. Does it exist? That it is. Some things can have essentia, but not esse. But we're ultimately talking about this question of being itself. And these are just two distinct ways of looking at being. How something is it a dog? Is it a human? Is it a rock? You know, how it is, okay? And that it is, you know, is the rock really there, you know? Is the human really there? Is the dog really there? Possibly not, okay? And these distinctions famously come from this man, St. Thomas Aquinas. I don't think I've mentioned him before in class, but there's a picture of him, which may be somewhat accurate. But anyways, you can see when he lived. He lived in the 1200s, the 13th century, Italian, in central, down by Naples, Italy. And great thinker, great philosopher. And he wrote a book called the Summa Theologiae, the Summary of Theology, in 3 parts, 3 books. So you have part, and this is how you distinguish them, part 1, so the prima, the first volume. And then there's part 2, which has 2 sections to it. So you have the first and the second of the second part. And then you have the third part. And he never completed it. He died before he was able to complete this summary. Yeah, 3-volume, multi-volume summary, right, Mr. Lattimore? Doesn't sound like a summa to me, Mr. Lattimore, but okay. Yeah. Anyway, so he died before he could complete it. And how it's organized it's what's called the scholastic method of, you have a question, like say, what is the nature of God? And then you have different points of view of what the nature of God is. Or a question like, no, let me get a better question. You know, is God good? Is God good? And then you have points of view. No, God is not good because of X. Okay, and another point of view, no, doesn't seem that God could be good because of this idea. So these kind of ideas, objections to the statement that is God good or God is good. And then you get the response. So Aquinas, or whoever, he wasn't unique in this. This is a common way of doing philosophy in the Middle Ages, would then respond to each, would give his own view briefly, and then would launch into a response to each objection and saying why he thinks each one is wrong, okay? And these were not straw men objections. They were, as they say, steel men objections. These were good objections, you know? Okay, these were not just silly, like, stupid things that a person might say. These were good philosophical arguments against the position you were going to argue for. Okay, so that's how the method, how it worked. But anyways, so in the context of his discussion of God in the Prima in volume 1, questions 2 through 4, he talks about this, that there is ens, simply being, whatever is, but then ens, you know, we know that there are things that have essence in our minds or something, but they don't really exist in reality, or we don't know. And then we know things that do have an essence and do exist, like me. You know, I have an essence, a human nature, and for all that you know, Mr. Urban, I exist, as far as you know, right? Because you can't know for sure. Let's hope. Maybe you can. So ens is the comprehensive term for these two realities, the thing that exists and then the question of whether it has existence, right? And esse is an action. Esse, existing, is an act. It's a form of action. It's not just possibility. Because just because something can exist doesn't mean that it does exist, that it's performing the act of existence, or that it must exist. So the question of God, you know, just because a God could exist doesn't mean that a God does exist. So even Aquinas, who's a Christian, was a Christian and a saint, maintains that God's existence is not self-evident. It's not absolutely self-evident. Of course, we know, from faith and the revelation of the church that, yeah, it is self-evident. We have to believe it. But that's why it's a belief. God bless you. I move on from that. In the case of God, because I have essence and existence, but I'm not being in and of itself. I've received both from something else, from my parents. When they came together, when they had sex, and there was a conception, which was not necessarily, didn't have to happen. Not a woman doesn't always get pregnant from sex. But in my case, yay, we had success. So I have a nature that's given to me from my parents who are humans, but I also have existence from them because they had to make a decision to have the sexual act with the possibility, again, not always 100% in the sexual act. Sometimes the woman doesn't become pregnant, okay? So there's the possibility, they hoped, the production of a new life, the creation of a new life, existence, that something would come into existence. That's not the way it is with God, though. Because God doesn't have to worry about these things. He doesn't receive his essence from something else, as I already told you. There's not something else giving godhood to God. And of course, he has to exist because he didn't exist. That's an imperfection. He can't exist. God can't exist. God is only possibly existing. So none of these two actually applies ultimately to God. This one does. This makes sense. To be a God, you have to be whatever you are, but you also have to be in the first place. And so this being as God is, these two come together into one. So God is ens. God is being itself because his essence is to be. They are identical. His essence and existence are identical in God. So for God, if there is a God, that's for me to know if there's a God, okay? Because I it's not self-evident to me. Obviously, for God, it's self-evident. It's not even a question that God is. To be God, if there is a God, means to exist. So God is the own principle of his existence. He's the own principle of existence. He exists, and as we might say, in and of himself. Okay? The Latin phrase from our buddy Thomas Aquinas, which I translate for you, Deus est ipsum esse, per se subsistens. Deus, God, est, is, that which ipsum esse exists per se, of itself, subsisted. So he subsists, if you want a literal thing, he's existence itself by himself remaining in existence. But there are other ways we could translate this, okay? To subsist is just another word for existence. In a manner of speaking. I'm not going to get into the distinctions between subsist and other things, but anyway. God is the one who is existing of himself. That's another translation, a little bit more looser. Get even looser. God exists in and of himself. That's the loosest translation I can come up with. God exists in and of himself. Deus est ipsum esse per se subsistens. God exists in and of himself. He doesn't receive it from something else. Now, if existence, let's assume that existence is unitary. Okay? I'm going to assume that existence is unitary. Not everyone would assume this, but from a Christian and a Jewish perspective, we would. And I think it makes sense, because I would not agree, even if I were not a Christian or something, I don't think I would agree with those who think that existence is divided up between everything, that everything has its own unique existence, because it doesn't seem to make much sense. I mean, do you really think that all of us in this room are existing differently? There are like 20 different types of existence in this room. Actually, there would have to be, if we are logical about it, follow through on the logic, there would have to be trillions upon trillions upon trillions of existences if you count all the different things that are in the universe. If each thing has its own separate, unique existence, there seems to be a unity of existence. We're not the same, obviously. We're not the same, but we do all exist. Just like we're not the same human beings, but we are all human, yes? So it seemed that existence or being is in some way singular. Something either exists or it doesn't. It exists, period. So that if God is identical to existence, and existence is unitary, then God should be unitary, should be a unity, one existence. And so this becomes the fundamental idea of Israel. I mean, the Jews weren't philosophizing. When you read the Bible, it's not a book of philosophy. It doesn't philosophize, Ms. Free J, to the belief that, because there's only one existence, there would have to be only, and God is existence, there has to be only one God. No, it has to be revealed to them. It's through revelation that there's one God. It takes time for them to even accept this belief that there's one God. Because, it's not really natural. I mean, if you look out into the world, you see diversity, right? Diverse types of essences and things. So why shouldn't there be diverse existences, different types of gods? A really high God, but then lower gods and goddesses and all sorts of stuff, spirits and demons and all, nymphs and all this stuff. Why not? That made sense to people. If existence is diverse, like the world is diverse, but if existence is unitary, then God is not unitary, or God is unitary, or the ultimate being is unitary. Now that you have to explain, well, why is there diversity in the world? That's another question, but I'm not going to talk about that now. So monotheism, the belief that there is only one God. Okay, this has to be revealed to the Jews and repeated to them. I mean, it didn't stick for a long, long time. It wasn't necessarily obvious even to the Jews. And so you see this when you read the Bible. You read some of the ancient texts in the Bible, and they believe in the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but they also believe there are other gods and spirits. And some of these they even worship in addition to the God of Jacob. But, you have the message there that there's only one God, especially amongst the prophets. That's one of the reasons the prophets were usually angry, because they had to keep reminding the Israelites, get away from these other gods. There's only one God. There is no other God. It didn't make sense to their minds that there could only be one God. It didn't make sense to them. So there is only one God. This idea has to finally develop, and it's only really in the exile when the Jews are exiled especially to Iraq, to Babylon in the 500s, when the Jews start thinking about this and monotheism really starts to take root. People are like, we're being punished by God because we were worshiping these other gods and we weren't worshiping the one true God. Okay, that's what they kind of realized during the exile. So if God is existence and he exists, he's not a possibility or a potentiality, potency, this idea of potency, which comes from the word posse in Latin, which means to be able to do something, can. There is no can in God, Miss Fennell. There's nothing God can't do, right? Oh, Dr. Dunn, can God make a rock so heavy that even he can't lift it? Question you can't answer, Because if you say, well, yes, he can, well, then God's not all powerful because he can't lift the rock. You say, well, no, he can't because he's all powerful. Well, then he's potency, he's possibility. He can't do something, or he can't, there's something he can't do. What about, whatever. Yes, these are fun little syllogisms that we can make up, and they're fun to play with, but it's not really serious in a manner of speaking. But the problem is serious. Are there things that God can't do? That's not possibility in God. Can God change? Is he potential? Is he just potentially God? He's God, but he's always becoming more God in a manner of speaking. So potency is the state or condition of being able to do something or act. God is God able to create the world, okay? And again, that's not necessarily self-evident, and you see this also in the Jewish scriptures and the early Jewish conceptions of God. God changes his mind in the story. That's how the Jews explained it. When something happens that they think is from God, but then something else happens that kind of contradicts it. So in their minds, God himself must have changed his mind. He might have changed course or something, decided to do something else, or regretted doing something. So that was their perception of what was going on in God. But as we develop and we think about who God is and what a God should be, it doesn't make sense that a God should be possibility or only have potency. There are no possibilities in God. God does not have the potential to be wise. It's part of his nature. He has these things by nature. So God is creative by nature. So it's not a question of he can do it. It's a matter of, does he want to do it? It's not a question of the potency, because that's not a question. It's part of his nature. It's the will that we're looking at, actually, when we're asking that question. Because God has a will, and God can decide to do, just like us, can decide to do X, Y, and Z. God can say no. That's something people don't understand. I guess it's an issue in prayer. When people pray to God and they're like, and again, you'll see this on comedians will joke about this, or, on atheist websites, I pray, it's useless, because it's like the stone, the example I just gave you, can God make a rock? Why pray to God? God has a plan, He's not going to change his plan for you just because you ask him. You're one person, So what's the purpose? It makes no sense. So they tie people into knots, And if you do pray, you don't always get what you ask for. So that kind of the assumption is, and it's kind of catastrophizing, like just because you don't always get something you ask for, it means that there's either no God there to answer your prayers, or just God can't answer your prayer to do something. Okay, well, what if God says no sometimes? Does God always have to say yes to my prayer, whatever it is? God, heal me of my cancer. No. No. Maybe that's how I was intended to die. I was intended to get cancer and die. That was what was written for me. That was my fate according to the will of God. Well, why would God will that? Well, I don't know. Why do you will to do things? Do you know? Sometimes you have reasons. Do you ever do things to other people or have to do things to other people that you don't want to do, but you have to do? Or work at Burger King and have to fire somebody? Guy who keeps spitting in the burgers? Yeah. Oh, dude, why are you doing this to me? I'm going to lose my job. Yeah, but you keep spitting in the burgers. I don't want to fire you, but I have to. I mean, if we allow for ourselves to say no to people, why can't God? People don't like it when I say no to them. I should always say yes. Mr. Dunk, we have extra credits. Mr. Dunk, we do. I should always say yes, right? Because you'll destroy me on the evaluation and I'll get fired, So okay, say yes to everybody. Don't like it when you say no. You'll know that when you're, yeah, no pun intended, Mr. Urban. But when you become parents, the first time one of your kids tells you that she hates you. I, all right, tough room. Anyways, so God is either good or he's not. He's not a mixture of good and evil, which again is not self-evident as well. Because again, you look out at the world, as I mentioned cancer before, yeah, I got a good life. Okay, I'm happy. So God is good. Oh, you got stage 4 brain cancer. Uh-oh. So what does that mean? God is now evil? Hooray! God is evil! And he's good. Or is God only good when I'm feeling good? It's a nice, beautiful, sunny day, but if I get into a car accident on the way home, no, God sucks. God's a bad guy, I don't know. God's nature changes all of a sudden. He becomes dark. And so again, you see that in the Bible. You see that in the old writings of the Bible. Early on, the Jews, there's good in the world, there's bad in the world. They must both come from God. So God, not that it wasn't totally clear that God wasn't evil. In fact, the whole book of Job in the Old Testament is devoted to that question. Where does evil come from? Why is there evil? And in the Revelation, basically the whole book, God is trying to reveal that yes, there is evil in the world, but it's not from me. I am good. I don't do evil things to people. I might allow evil things to happen, but I'm not evil. God has to tell Job, no, I'm not evil. Because that's not, in a lot of the ancient religions, yeah, that made perfect sense that you have good gods and evil gods. And they were both gods. And you had to worship both of them. You had to make both of them happy, both the good gods and the bad. Okay? So it made perfect sense to ancient people. What didn't make sense was a God who was all good, because then how do you explain the evil in the world? The bad things that happen. So that didn't make sense to people. So God is by nature good. He's not potentially good. He's not wanting to be good. He's not potentially merciful. He is merciful. He is these things absolutely. They exist in actuality in him. They're not impossibility. They are acts of God. They are constant actions of God. Okay, constant because remember, if you believe in the God of Israel and the God of Christianity, the God, he has no beginning or end. He is existence itself. He's always existed. So there's not a question of not existing. So the question of time becomes not a question either. It doesn't apply to God. All right. There's no before God existed or, a few more minutes later God existed. These questions don't even make sense if something simply is existence itself. Okay. So if he's existing, he's always acting. He's always creative. He's always these things. He is the actus purus. Are you done with me? I got a few minutes, Miss Cobb. Okay, stick with me, Miss Cobb. Don't let. Actus purus ascendi, the pure act of being. Actus, act, purus, pure, and ascendi, we know, being, to be. Pure, he is realized perfection. He is all perfection realized. I guess I'll go back. Come back to this. No, we'll go back on that. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so, I guess I want to talk about this from Exodus, but I'll come back to this on Thursday. So I'll stop here. God bless you all. Where is this? Yes,
I had a
sir.
couple questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
First, I thought it was interesting toward the end. I was actually wondering, where do you think evil does come?
Well, evil is not a thing. See, that's another question that
Yeah.
had to be dealt with because people thought evil was, I'll leave it. That evil was like a stuff in the universe.
Yeah.
Okay. And in the ancient world, that's how they conceived of it. You might even conceive of it that way in ancient Judaism, that it had existence of its own.
Yeah.
Okay. But no, of Christian thinkers thought, no, evil is not another being, almost like it's in opposition to God. Like you've got a good being
Yeah.
and then the evil being and this good stuff and bad stuff. Okay. Which you do see in ancient religions where you have the good God as opposed to the bad God, and they're kind of at war with each other. Or the good forces in the world at war with the evil forces. But Christians, I can't speak for Jews, but Christian thinkers said, no, evil is not something that exists. It's what doesn't exist. Wherever goodness is not, that is
It's like
evil.
the absence of.
It's the absence of goodness, of the good. For example, when I was talking about cancer, our good is to be healthy, to be whole, to not be damaged or not have our bodies not work the way they're supposed to.
Yeah.
But when they don't, what's evil is that's taking away the fact that they don't work the way they're supposed to,
That's interesting.
or they're damaged.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lack.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that makes sense.
Okay.
It's like a good way to like. That's cool. I guess.
Yeah.
I also
Thank
had a
you, Saint
question
Augustine,
about.
for that.
I had a question on my ass.
Yes, sir.
So the like.
Oh, wait. Let me turn this off then. So I